that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
Good evening and welcome. We begin tonight with what was billed as a crucial diplomatic test for the Prime Minister on the world stage, a meeting with former United States President Donald Trump. This was meant to be an opportunity for Sir Keir Starmer to project strength and solidify the special relationship. However, reports emerging from that closed-door meeting paint a picture not of statesmanship, but of a brutal and deeply humiliating political dismantling that has sent shockwaves through Westminster and beyond.
That is absolutely correct. The stakes for Sir Keir could not have been higher. He has been keen to present himself as a leader who can restore Britain's standing and deal effectively with all international figures, regardless of their political style. He clearly anticipated a formal, perhaps even cordial diplomatic photo opportunity. Instead, he walked into what sources are now describing as a meticulously planned political ambush, for which he seemed utterly unprepared.
Let us delve into the specifics of this encounter. The pleasantries, we are told, were minimal. Mr. Trump wasted no time in going directly for the political jugular, looking at the Prime Minister and making the astonishingly blunt accusation, "You're locking people up for Facebook posts." The directness of that statement in a diplomatic setting is almost unheard of.
It is, and it reportedly sucked all the air out of the room. Aides on both sides were said to be frozen. Sir Keir's immediate response was an attempt to deflect, to fall back on familiar rhetoric about the United Kingdom's proud and long history of protecting free speech and civil liberties. But Mr. Trump was relentless. He refused to let the point go, repeating the accusation and questioning the Prime Minister's claims, effectively cross-examining him. It was at that moment, witnesses say, that the Prime Minister's composure began to visibly crack.
In an apparent effort to steer the conversation onto safer ground, Sir Keir then shifted to praising Winston Churchill, noting his personal admiration for the bust of the wartime leader displayed in the room. On the surface, a standard attempt to build rapport.
A very standard attempt, but one that revealed a catastrophic lack of judgment. It was a clear appeal to Mr. Trump's well-documented admiration for Churchill, but it was a move that was breathtakingly hypocritical. This, after all, is the same Keir Starmer who, just 3 years ago, had a portrait of Churchill removed from his own office. His stated reasons at the time were that he disliked the way its eyes followed him, and he had also publicly called for a more nuanced, critical view of Churchill's legacy. The praise he offered to Mr. Trump was a complete reversal of his domestic position.
The contradiction is glaring, and it is this perceived hypocrisy that gives Mr. Trump's initial accusation its power, because it is grounded in a much wider and very real controversy here in the United Kingdom over freedom of speech online.
Precisely, Mr. Trump's criticism was not occurring in a vacuum. The Prime Minister's defense of free speech seems incredibly fragile when you consider the facts on the ground. We have seen a grandmother imprisoned for 15 months for sharing anti-immigration posts on Facebook. A teenager received a 2-year sentence for creating memes the government found offensive. There was even the case of the Member of Parliament, Mike Ramby, sentenced to prison for a Facebook post, who then received an appeal with a speed that raised serious questions about political interference, a swiftness not afforded to ordinary citizens. It is this backdrop that made Sir Keir's position so difficult to defend.
The awkwardness then reportedly escalated further. In what seems to have been a final, grand attempt to salvage the meeting, the Prime Minister produced a formal letter from His Majesty the King. He presented it with great fanfare, announcing an invitation for Mr. Trump to make a second state visit to the United Kingdom, describing the offer as unprecedented and truly historic.
Commentators have almost universally interpreted this as an act of sheer desperation. It was a jarring spectacle, particularly given that this is the same Keir Starmer who stated emphatically just 2 years ago that he would never invite Donald Trump to dinner, labeling his rhetoric as dangerous and his policies as divisive. To now be personally facilitating a royal-backed state visit invitation is a pivot so dramatic, it appears less like diplomacy and more like begging.
And the pressure was not solely coming from Mr. Trump. His Vice President, J.D. Vance, also took the opportunity to confront the Prime Minister, broadening the attack.
He did, and he focused on the tangible effect of British law on Americans. He brought up the United Kingdom's Online Harms Bill, arguing that its regulations on tech platforms mean that British law is now effectively clipping the wings of American companies and restricting the speech of American citizens online. He made the very pointed claim that Sir Keir is locking up our citizens for innocent comments. The Prime Minister's defence that these are simply necessary online safety measures clearly failed to land with his American counterparts.
The visual element of this encounter, as described by those present and analysts who have seen the footage, tells its own story. The body language was apparently a stark contrast. Mr. Trump was described as sitting in a relaxed, open power pose, projecting total confidence. Sir Keir, on the other hand, was physically tense, his posture crossed up, making himself appear smaller. More than that, there were these repeated, unreciprocated gestures from the Prime Minister, patting Mr. Trump's arm, touching his shoulder, which have been widely described as fawning and submissive.
It all contributes to a narrative of a profound power imbalance in that room, and the political fallout is already taking shape. The Labour Party has been forced into damage control, issuing statements about successful engagement, but the footage tells a different story. The Conservative Party is already using this to frame Sir Keir as a leader who is weak and easily dominated on the world stage. Within his own party, there are now whispers about his credibility and whether he has the steel required for such high-stakes diplomacy.
Ultimately, this single meeting seems to have crystallized a much larger issue, the chasm between the American and the modern British political approach. It was a clash between a style that prioritizes blunt, unfiltered authenticity and one that relies on carefully managed, poll-tested messaging. In this instance, the carefully managed approach completely fell apart.
It certainly did. It exposed a vulnerability in politicians who attempt to be one thing to their domestic audience and another to leaders abroad. In an age of ubiquitous cameras and social media, those contradictions are impossible to hide. What happened in that room was not just a diplomatic blunder, it was a brutal lesson in the changing nature of international politics and a personal humiliation for the Prime Minister from which it may be very difficult to recover.